Hello and welcome to the latest Arcade Attack podcast. It's Adrian here, and today I'm joined by Starr along. Now he is an Origin Systems legend who's worked on many Wing Commander games, Ultima series, the Ultima Online game of course, BioForge, a personal favourite. He's worked for Disney, he's worked for Portalarium with Richard Garriott, aka Lord British. So guys, sit back and enjoy a great interview with a real retro gaming legend. So we've got here on the latest Arcade Attack podcast, Starr Long. Now he, proper retro gaming legend, a proper gaming legend of mine. So thank you so much for your time today, Starr.
You are most welcome. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. I'd love to start with from the beginning, really, if that's all right, Starr, about maybe your earliest memories of gaming, your fondest memories while you're growing up, and how you got into, how you got the love of the gaming industry, really.
Great question. I have been playing games really my entire life. Our family played games. My dad, I think, really instilled a love of games in me. He played chess and checkers with me. We played board games. We played Scrabble, Monopoly, Life, all sorts of games like that. And then when I was in middle school was when I discovered role-playing games and video games. And that was, sort of the beginning of the end, if you will. That was our both, video games was a combination of arcade games. And that was really in elementary school. And also I had, first I had a Pong, which was the very first home video games, but it wasn't even an actual Pong. It was a clone from Radio Shack. So I didn't even have an actual Pong. I had a Radio Shack clone of Pong. And then quickly after that, I got an Atari 2600 and convinced my parents to get me as many games as I could possibly have on there. And, so played games at home on my Atari and then played games in the arcade. And then I didn't have a computer at home, but I had computers at school. And then my friend had an IBM personal computer at his house. And so I would go over to his house and we would play Wizardry and Ultima, which at the time were the sort of head-to-head competitors in computer role-playing games. So that's kind of a brief summary of my history love of games.
I was going to ask you about obviously Ultima later, but you were a fan way before you got the opportunity to work on the franchise. How crazy is that, really?
Yeah. When we get to how I got started in the game industry, it's kind of bizarre.
I appreciate it. Let's get straight to it. I love it because obviously I played games growing up, but I never thought, it never really crossed my mind to actually try and get into the industry. But you not only just got into it, you've made a proper mark in the industry. So I'd love to know how you first got the opportunity and your first few jobs and how that was good few years ago now.
Well, funnily enough, I was like you. I played video games growing up, and I actually played video games my whole life, all the way, up until right before I got a job making them. Yeah. But I never made the intellectual leap forward that, hey, people actually have jobs doing this. Yeah. And despite the fact that I have a degree in theater. So obviously I knew that people made a living making entertainment for people. But again, I hadn't read articles or learned who made the games or, other than seeing the names in the credits, I didn't really know who those people were. And so when I had moved to Austin, Texas after graduating college, and I was sort of taking a break between getting my undergraduate and my graduate degree in theater. And I needed some steady work, and I did some odd jobs, and including doing some work in theater and even some construction work. And flipping through the wanted ads at my friend's house after literally playing Wizardry one night. We saw this job ad that said video game tester wanted.
Wow.
And we were sure this was not real.
Yeah.
Like we were absolutely 100% certain. In fact, what we had decided was, because we kept going back and forth, like, no, this cannot be real. No, absolutely. And so what we finally decided was that it had to be a university psychology experiment. And what was going to happen when I showed up was it wasn't going to be an actual job interview. There was going to be graduate students in lab coats, and they would be like, oh, okay, so this is the kind of person who would show up for this job ad. Can you answer some questions about like your lifestyle and how many hours a week you spend playing video games? But the job ad, interestingly enough, did not show the company.
Right.
It just said, it literally was just this little plain black and white ad that said video game testers wanted, and then a temporary employment agency, address and phone number.
Yeah.
And so I went to the interview, and I passed the temporary agency interview, and they still didn't tell me. And they were like, "Oh wow, yeah, you're. By the way, most people who apply for this job don't have college degrees, but great. That's you'll do well. Here, that we're gonna send you on to interview at the company.
Yeah.
Like okay, and like here's the address, and they still hadn't told me who and where it was. So I show up for the interview, and I get into the building, and it's Origin Systems.
That's amazing.
It's where they're playing Ultima and where they make Ultima and Wing Commander. I'm like, what is going on? This not only is it real, but it's a place where I've played these games.
Oh yeah.
And there's like there's the posters of all the games on the wall, and there's I guess this is where all the people whose names were in these credits work. And I got the job, and it was in QA testing the games, and it was real. And I was there for about 2 weeks, and I remember distinctly calling my parents and saying, I've got some good news and some bad news. I'm not sure which is which, but you're not going to have to help me pay for graduate school. Because I'm not going back to graduate school. I'm going to make video games for the rest of my life. And I'm going to stay, I found my calling. This is the best thing that has ever happened to me.
Wow.
I'm going to run this company someday.
I mean,
yeah, that's what happened.
That's incredible. I love that story.
Yeah.
I bet you had to pinch yourself a few times when you first walked into Origin Systems offices. Must have been amazing.
Yeah, it was definitely surreal. There were for those first few weeks, there was some moments, and my friends who, of course, we had that discussion of this can't be real, kept saying, wait a minute, they kept like asking me, now wait a minute, so the thing is real, and you are getting paid to play video games. I'm like, well, it's not as fun as it sounds. The games are like really broken and they're not done. And they're like, don't try to like make it seem uncool. It is super cool. And I'm like, yeah, it's super cool.
Do you remember the first game you worked on there for quality assurance at Origin?
Yes, I do. It was actually the Game Boy version of Ultima.
Wow.
It was called Runes of Virtue, which most people don't even know exist. And there's not only one, but there's two of them.
Is there?
Yeah.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, so there's a Game Boy, and not only that, it was the second one, Runes of Virtue 2, was the first, as far as we know, the first game made in North America that used the Link So you could connect two Game Boys together, and it was a 2-player co-op game.
Oh wow! So that's a proper gaming first. If that's wow.
Yeah, and it's a great Game Boy RPG.
Yeah.
So so that and Serpent Isle and Ultima. I actually was testing 3 games at once. So Ultima Underworld 2. Game Boy Runes of Virtue, and Underworld 2 were the 3 games that I was testing when I first learned.
That's amazing. I've actually spoken to quite a few quality assurance people in game in the past. People like James Hampton. I think he worked at LucasArts first and went on to make a lot of Atari Jaguar games. And it's obviously it's a really important job. But how important? Can you almost describe a typical day working in quality assurance? It's not just playing games, obviously. What sort of things would you usually do back then?
Yeah, so it is really incredibly important to the whole process because what most people don't realize what has to happen before a game goes, that a game ships is, first of all, games take a lot of effort to make, right? And games involve a lot of coding and content creation, and they involve a lot of logic sequences, like if this happens, then do this thing, those logic sequences are based on the input of the player, and so you as the tester your job is to at first you kind of run through the game as if in the way it's intended to happen, right? Like what you would imagine the correct and sort of logical sequence of things. Like, yes, I'm going to go from point A to point B to point C in a pretty logical, like the way most people will do things.
Yeah.
But once you do that, then you start to do your job really becomes, well, I'm going to try and break the game. Like I'm going to do things in unusual sequences. I'm going to go, I'm going to pick up things in the wrong order. I'm going to press this thing. I'm going to click really fast. And so because that's what people do, right? People don't do things in the correct order or the right way. And so, and a lot of it is, building these very elaborate, long checklists that make sure you walk through. And the more complex and elaborate the game is, the more complex and detailed these checklists are to make sure that the game, every part of the game works correctly. And there's multiple levels of that. So there's like a quick, what we call a sanity check, that just says, okay, does this particular version or build of the game work? Does all the basic functionality? Does it like boot up? Can I make a character and do the basic functions like move it around and talk to NPCs and equip an item or pick up items or add items to my inventory, right? So that would be what you do that like within a few minutes, and the reason that like something like a sanity check is important because that tells the developers, do they need to do a new build right away or not? Yeah. Because builds take hours, right? And in the old days, we didn't really even have a network at the office. You had what was called SneakerNet. So you would do a build, and then you would literally have to walk the build over from where the developers were to where we were in QA, physically. Nice. Like physical media. Yeah. And in those days, it was like on floppy disks and lots of floppy disks. So to like play the game, you had to insert floppy disk after floppy disk after floppy disk after floppy disk, especially for these big complicated games. And so you do a sanity check, but then you do a much more elaborate playthrough of the game. And there's two varieties of that playthrough. There's the developer will want to know. What nowadays people call a speed run, right? Which is where, just play through the game as quickly as possible to the end and let me know if you can finish the game. Yeah. And the developer wants to know that fairly quickly. So we would have certain testers assigned to that to say, okay, can you get to the end of the game? And in the course of development, and as you're building out the game, that's not done yet, right? So when you first start as a tester, when you first start playing the game, you can maybe only get like, a tenth of the way, a quarter of the way, a third of the way, and further and further and further until you're done with development and you can ship the game. So, and generally that cycle of how far you can get in the game expands over time. But then the developer will want you to do a more methodical playthrough. And then some games will have multiple outcomes. So you have to do different playthroughs where you make different choices along the way. Then you have to do things like test on different hardware, because not everybody has the same kind of hardware. So you have to test on different kinds of machines, different platforms, different operating systems, different media. Like, so if you're shipping on different kinds of floppy disks or floppy disks versus like when CDs started, we were shipping on CDs, we had to test on floppy disks and CDs during that transitional phase, and then it became test on CDs versus DVDs, etc. And then whenever you find something wrong, you write down what the bug is, what broke.
Yeah.
But then once you do that, you have to try and repeat it.
Right. Yeah.
You have to try and replicate exactly what happened, because the first thing that'll happen when you hand that bug to a developer is they're going to try and repeat the bug. And if they don't have the steps to repeat it, they're going to send it back to you in QA and say, well, I can't repeat that.
Yeah.
It works fine on my machine. So you, as a QA person, the very first thing you do when you find something broken is you try to repeat the steps that triggered that mistake. Wow.
So it's not just literally playing games. It's proper, intense, quite an important, really important job, isn't it, really?
Oh, yeah. It's very methodical, and it takes a very, you have to have a very analytical mind to do it properly.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think your initial role as working in QA helped out a lot in because you moved up the ranks very quickly, but do you think that first position helped a lot in the future roles you played?
Yeah, I would like to think so. I would like to believe that it gave me a perspective that made me think about the end product strongly, and hopefully about the quality of the product, and made me think about what it meant to keep the quality of the product forward in your mind. So I'd like to think that, the realities of budgets and time frames and dealing with executive demands, of course, make you compromise a lot of those desires when you get into situations. But I would like to believe that starting in QA definitely helped me in that role. And it definitely helped me from an organizational standpoint. Definitely helped me as far as project management and thinking very analytically, for sure.
Oh, great stuff. I'd love to learn more about Origin Systems, because it's rightly regarded as one of the most famous, and well-respected video game companies of its time, especially in the PC industry. What was it like working there? Could you sort of sum up working with people like Ken, Demarest, Richard Garriott, and other legends, and Origin Systems as a whole?
So Origin was a pretty fantastic place. It was this really amazing collision between technology and creativity and playfulness.
Yeah.
One of the things that we worked really, really hard, maybe a little too hard. There was quite a bit of overtime, but the amount of just sheer creativity and desire to do things differently and do really high levels of simulation, world simulation, that was kind of the mantra of Origin was we create worlds.
Yeah.
And this sort of overriding desire of everybody at that company to create these world simulations, which now is become more commonplace in games, but at the time was not.
Yeah.
It was, and so the amount of creativity and we would do these. Sometimes we would play through the games on paper first before we would code them, because this you got to remember that this was before there were any off-the-shelf pre-existing kind of game engines of any kind.
Yeah.
And so everything had to be written from scratch every single time. Or if you had a game engine in-house, you could repurpose it and reuse it, but that was still pretty uncommon. And a lot of it was because technology was changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
We were moving between processors and physical media every couple of years, and so your chance to reuse an engine was pretty slim. And the idea that you would have a reusable engine was still something not. So the analogy I like to use is, imagine if you went to film a movie, and before you filmed the movie, you had to invent cameras. So that was kind of what it was like making games back then.
Yeah.
It was like you literally would invent the camera before you could even start filming. But that playfulness was a pretty amazing part of it too. Like there were these things called green guns, which were basically early sort of home laser tag, where there would be laser tag games in the lobby of the building.
Nice.
There were Richard would host these every other year. He would host this insane haunted house at his own home, where we would build these like Hollywood level special effects and prosthetic costumes, and like he had these friends in the fire department who would do things like bring an oil field fire simulator that shoot like 30-foot fireballs in the air for part of his own. I mean, it was just it was, and so and then we would work with groups like Looking Glass, who did the Underworld games, which was one of the very first full first-person 3D games ever, and when I played that, testing that in Underworld 2, it was just like, oh my God, what is this? So it was, and then another thing that struck me is the artists that worked there. There would, on the whiteboards, there would be these amazing just murals that they would put up on the whiteboards of just these amazing scenes, just because. In addition to like making the art for the game, they would just create these incredible murals, and so it was a really special place. And Chris Roberts, Richard Garriott, Warren Spector, Ken Demarest, and there's also little known things on the technology side that like we helped write the very first graphics languages for Windows, like all the OpenGL stuff. We helped write that. Like we sent our top graphics programmers to Microsoft to help write all of the initial graphics language stuff for Windows.
Wow.
Oh.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's a great little fact. And I mean, I always saw Origin Systems as always ahead of the time, really amazing technology being, the games being pumped out was absolutely incredible. I mean, how did you feel when it shut down the company? It must have been quite a sad time when you heard it was going to close, right?
Yeah, it was definitely the passing of an era for sure.
Mm.
But it's a cycle that happens in. It's an unfortunate cycle in the business where smaller companies are acquired by larger companies, and it is a very difficult challenge in that scenario for the smaller company to retain its ability to move forward properly while being part of that larger entity. And, Electronic Arts gets a lot of bad rap for that. But, I will also say Electronic Arts did a really great job in a lot of ways at the same time. And without Electronic Arts, Ultima Online would have never happened.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Ultima Online was not part of the original budget or plans of Origin. It took a lot of convincing to get Electronic Arts to support it, but they provided the initial seed money for it. Once they were convinced, they definitely were on board with it. There were some ham-fisted decisions that happened along the way, but Electronic Arts poured a lot of money into Origin systems, and now that unfortunately there was a good side and a bad side to that. That ultimately, I think, Origin overextended and overexpanded, it became too big too fast. But Electronic Arts tried really hard to make Origin work, and I think that we became victims of our own expansion and success. Like we weren't necessarily equipped to be that big. We were better at being small.
I see some parallels. You may disagree, Starr, from like Westwood Studios. I think they were, they produced some brilliant games as well. And obviously EA got involved. Maybe that's a similar kind of thing as well. I don't know if you agree.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The parallels were. I mean, it was exactly the same situation.
Yeah. I'll talk more about Ultima Online later, but I'd love to start with Wing Commander because. Arguably, and it's arguably, but it's definitely one of Origin Systems' most well-known sort of titles and games. Yeah. Did you work on any Wing Commander games, and if so, what was your roles in these games?
I only worked on those when I was in QA, and I worked on Wing Commander Academy, which was the only multiplayer Wing Commander. And I also worked on Privateer.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which was awesome. I was a tester on both of those. And they were both really unique titles sort of in the Wing Commander universe. Most people know about, Wing Commander 1, 2, and 3, and 4, because those are the big, especially, like Wing Commander 3 and 4, because those are the big sort of movie titles where like they had Mark Hamill in there. Yeah. And those are the ones that most people are familiar with. But like Academy was pretty cool because it was multiplayer and you got to fly Kirathi ships.
Yeah.
And so it's not a very well known Wing Commander title, but it's really cool. And so you can fly like one player can play Kirathi ships while the other player is flying the other ships, the human ships. And so flying the human ships versus the Kirathi ships is pretty killer.
Nice.
It's the only, as far as I know, it's still the only Wing Commander title where you can do that.
Yeah, because I have to confess, I haven't played that one. I've only played 1, 2, and 3, really, the sort of older ones and with the Mark Hamill kind of ones, truthfully. But I have to check it out, definitely.
Yeah, you should. And then Privateer, was, definitely took its inspiration from, Han Solo and the whole idea of being the smuggler and and it's all about moving, sort of building your own spaceship and being like a commercial smuggler, privateer, fighter. So you build up a custom ship over time, and you get to customize the ship and like customize what the weapons are, the engine, and the shields, and while you're in combat, you have to like manipulate that kind of stuff, and it was really cool, and also way ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And one of the projects right before a bunch of us left Origin that was going to be really cool was like a Privateer Online, which would have been amazing.
Well, yeah, you started work on that game, or just an idea, or?
It was in like a sort of conceptual phase, but it never really got enacted.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I mean, I don't know who owns the rights anymore for Wing Commander, and there was obviously a movie, but do you think there's room for a new game in the series?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, one of the things we, you know, every few years we kind of ping Electronic Arts about some of the intellectual property they own, like Ultima and Wing Commander, and you know, they always claim that they're going to do something with them, because we ping them and say, hey, you know, if you're not doing something with them, we'll gladly do something with them. But they always claim that there's something in the works, so we can't do anything with them.
Oh, that's so. I don't know. Do we believe them, Starr? I don't know.
I don't believe it.
Well, no, I think if they're not going to use the franchise or the IP, I think they should give it back to the people who made the games originally. But that's my view, obviously. But
or license it.
Yeah,
we were, you know, we were happy to pay a license, but you know, oh well.
Well, you never know. You never know. Maybe this time next year, who knows? Eh?
Who knows?
I love, probably my favourite actually Origin Systems game is probably BioForge, actually. I know it doesn't always get the recognition I think it deserves personally, but what was your role in this particular game, and did you work closely with Ken Demarest on this game?
Well, I am so glad that is your favorite, because BioForge was pretty pivotal for me and my career.
Oh, really?
So BioForge was... I think the last game that I worked on while I was still in quality assurance, and while I was there, you know, it was the very first game, or it was one of the first games at Origin where we used this branding interactive movie.
Yeah.
And during the development of that, I did get to work a lot with Ken Demarest. And one of the things that was really exciting about Ken is a technologist, and he was always really passionate about pushing the envelope of what technology was capable of doing. And one of the things he wanted to do was see if there was something different we could do with the way we animated the characters. And so he learned about something that was, at the time, pretty new and revolutionary, which was called motion capture.
Yeah.
And so he did a ton of research, and we actually got a bunch of, like, I don't know what the number was, but it seemed like a lot. It may have been like 10 different companies. That might be an exaggeration, but there were a bunch of different companies that came in and demoed their motion capture technology. And this is really early. I mean, this is way before, like, people are really familiar now. Well, I say that, but people are familiar now with the whole concept of motion capture. And when they think of motion capture, they think of the little dots.
Yeah.
People wearing the black leotard, and they have little white dots on them. And they're mostly familiar with it from movies, and they think of Gollum, and they think of Andy Serkis, and they of Gollum, right?
That's right, yeah.
But motion capture has been used in video games. In fact, it was used in video games before movies, and then movies started using it. And that technique of motion capture is video motion capture. And so that's where they use cameras to track dots, and then a computer uses those dots to map them to a humanoid skeleton, or actually they can do it with animals too. But and that's a visual system. And at the time that we were doing the research, I don't believe visual systems existed yet, or if they did, they were pretty primitive and they didn't really work very well.
Yeah.
And so Ken found a different one. Well, he found a system that used magnets and the orientation of magnets to do the motion capture. And so as I was testing, as I was being the test lead, and so I was assigned to be the lead tester for BioForge.
Yeah.
And one of the things, there were a couple of things that stood out for me to being the lead tester. One was this cool new motion capture technology.
Yeah.
The other thing that was really exciting about it was this idea that there was going to be multiple endings to the game depending on the choices you made.
Oh, so great.
And so as part of that, remember I was telling you about these checklists that you have to make for being quality assurance.
Yeah.
And so I had to make, multiple playthrough checklists for my team because we had to play through the game multiple different ways every single time to test all the different outcomes, right? Because every playthrough, if depending on how you made your choices, it ended differently, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing is working closely with Ken. Ken is a technology guy, and one of the things that I, coming from a QA background, and I also did stage management when I was in theater. I was very interested in project management, and so one of the things that this project needed help with was project management. So I asked Ken if I could also help with helping with in production, like scheduling and helping organize the project. So in addition to the QA stuff, I also helped a little bit in production. But the thing that I really was excited to get to do was, I was like, hey, Ken, I have a theater degree and I got to do some stage combat and things like that when I was getting my degree. And so, if you need someone to put on the suit, do like combat stuff, I'm your guy.
That's brilliant.
And so, like for a few months, every day for a couple of hours, me and Mike Chanot, who was one of the programmers on the project, would sit in the cafeteria because you needed a space. Because these were magnets.
Yeah.
You had to be in a really big open space because if you were too close to any metal, it would throw out the readings.
Wow.
So that was the Achilles heel of this system, was you couldn't be near any walls because in most office buildings, the studs in the walls are metal,
yeah,
which would interfere with the readings, which we discovered the hard way.
Really?
Yeah, well, because we tried to do it in a smaller space, and we were like, the arms would flail everywhere, and we were like, oh no, we're getting, and so we had to do it in the cafeteria because that was the only big open space.
Yeah.
And so a lot of in fact, I think all of the combat moves in that game are me.
That's great.
And so yeah, that was definitely like sort of the pinnacle of my testing career, and also I guess the first and only time that I got to be a motion capture actor. So and maybe the only time that motion capture system was used in a game. I'm not sure if it was used in other games ever.
That's brilliant.
Because quickly the visual motion capture system became the one and only dominant motion capture technology.
Right, yeah. So, well, I'll tell you what, Starr, I think you do a better roundhouse kick than me, that's for sure, because that's pretty impressive in the game, I have to say.
Yeah.
I mean, I like BioForge is great. I think it's quite a dark story. I really think, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think it sort of paved the way for things like Resident Evil, kind of those sort of 3D graphics. I know Alone in the Dark was a tad before, but it just seems so advanced, so ahead of its time, BioForge. Why do you think maybe it doesn't quite get the not respect, but the recognition it might deserve right now?
Well, I think there are two issues. I think one, it was pretty short.
Yeah.
So I think because and it was originally meant to be longer, but we just ran out of time and money. So the usual story. So I think that's one of the reasons. I think the other one is that if we made it now, I think it might get more recognition. But at the time, sci-fi was not getting as much, except for like Wing Commander. Sci-fi was not getting as much recognition as Sword and Sorcery in the video game space. I mean, Wing Commander was literally the only exception to that.
Yeah, it's a fair shout, yeah.
And so I think that might be another reason. But those are the only ones I can think of. I'm not
Yeah, I mean, I read you did need a big, powerful PC to play it. Maybe it wasn't accessible to everyone in the PC market, possibly, but that's what I read a little bit. But I mean, I loved it. I just did a podcast recently on it, and I spoke to Ken on a text interview, and he's really, gave some great answers. And what a great person Ken is, really. He's quite proud of it as well. But he said that one thing he found that let the game down a bit was the gameplay. That's the one thing he would change personally. What do you think about that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, there were a bunch of places where we wanted it to be a lot more freeform, and it devolved into just a click on this particular pixel to solve it. And the original design had it be much more freeform, but because of time and technology, we couldn't get it there.
Yeah.
But I think I would agree with him there. For sure.
Did you ever start work on the sequel or even the is it BioForge Plus? Sadly weren't released, obviously.
Well, so there was an expansion pack work started on for sure, and in fact, I think there was even some initial art made for it, but it never got finished.
Oh, fair,
and there was definitely it was part of a larger universe that had been starting to be fleshed out, in fact, as well. And I think originally Crusader and Crusader No Remorse, that sci-fi game that was supposed to be, I think, in the same universe.
Oh, wow.
Ultimately, it was decided to have it in a separate universe.
Oh, wow. Appreciate that stuff. I want to talk about Ultima now. You spoke earlier, right at the start of the pod, you were a fan growing up. What was the first Ultima game you started to actually work on, and was it after BioForge, and how did that sort of pan out?
Yeah, so while I was in QA, I had done Runes of Birch. I'd done a bunch. I'd done Serpent Isle, and I'd done Runes of Virtue, and then I'd done Ultima 8 Pagan. Yeah. And then and then I'd done BioForge, and right about that time was another one of Richard's haunted houses, and I worked with this guy Steve Hemphill to do lighting and special effects at the haunted house. And between working at Origin and working on the haunted house, I got to know Richard a little better.
Yeah. And
I was kind of infamous in QA because I sort of wrote these, my bugs were often, in addition to writing up the bugs, I would write these elaborate suggestions, and I would also sort of invite myself into developers' offices and just sort of talk to them about, hey, here's what I think about your game and this level, and it'd be like, who the hell is this guy?
Really?
So I became kind of infamous, and then I would just do things like on the BioForge thing, invite myself to help with the project management.
Yeah.
Or invite myself to be motion captured. And so I kind of made a name for myself. And then I kind of got burnt out and was going to leave. And then Richard, my boss at the time, Kay Gilmore, and Richard talked me out of it and said, hey, you have a really bright future here. You should stick around. And then, I worked on the haunted house, and then Ultima 9 was starting. And after that work on BioForge and other QA lead stuff, Richard asked if I wanted to be an associate producer on Ultima 9.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I have all these great ideas, and this. Now, right at the same time, Ken and I had been talking about how the internet and multiplayer was going to be the future.
Yeah.
And so while Richard is inviting me to be the associate producer to Ultima 9, Ken and I started working on a pitch for what we were calling Multima.
Wow, that's a good name.
And multiplayer Ultima.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yes, I'll absolutely be the associate producer for Ultima 9. But while I was doing that, I was also working on the pitch for this thing called Multima. And this idea was not necessarily new. The idea for a multiplayer Ultima had been brought up every now and then because, multiplayer games had existed on AOL and like the Sierra Network. I mean, Habitat had been done in the late 80s already at that point. And MUDs had existed at this point.
Yeah. So
the idea of a multiplayer computer role-playing game was not new.
No.
Right? But there was this convergence happening, Ken and I believed, with the internet and the soon to be launching World Wide Web. Because at this point, this was the end of 94, beginning of 95. And so the World Wide Web hadn't yet launched. And so our initial pitch was, it wasn't a massively multiplayer game. It was just literally a multiplayer game using the internet to connect people. And it was meant, like when you play Ultima, you would have your avatar and the 8 companions, and each of the companions represented the virtues. Mm. And so our initial pitch was, wouldn't it be awesome if, you could have the, 8 people playing together over the internet, the 8 companions per se. And that was the initial pitch. But then, we started looking at things like MUDs, and we're like, it could be a lot more than 8 people.
Yeah.
Could be hundreds of people. And so then it morphed to be like hundreds. And then we went to, so we came up with some pitches, and we brought them to Electronic Arts, and we were like, hey, we think this whole, World Wide Web and internet multiplayer gaming might be a big thing someday, soon. And they're like, don't think so. It's too early, And you have to remember at this point, the biggest online game ever had been Air Warrior, and that had been like 30,000 people.
Well, yeah, wow.
And so they're understandably like, we don't think it's going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
It took 3 pitches to get them to sort of go, okay, well, here's some money for you to go build a prototype. And so that's when Richard said, okay, well, I think this is this is a big deal. You need to go focus on this, and I'll find somebody else to work on Ultima 9. And he let me go do Ultima. And at that point, we changed the name from Ultima Online.
Yeah. And you were given the job as director. Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to sound... I don't want to put down the job of a QA because it's an important job, but that's a big leap, isn't it? Would you agree, Starr?
Yeah, it was a pretty huge jump after 3 years of QA to all of a sudden have my own project.
That's incredible. But, I mean, it's a huge success. It's still being played today, I believe, isn't it? It's popular. It's crazy. I know you said it wasn't the first multiplayer RPG, but it was one of the first really popular ones. It struck a chord. Why do you think? What was keeping the game's original essence, the old Ultima series, and moving it online? Was that your main goal for the game, or how do you look back at that time?
Yeah. So our main goal was to create a game where people could connect over the internet, where they didn't have to use a third-party service like AOL or anything like that, so they could connect directly through the internet. So that was, and people sort of take that for granted, but most people don't realize that before Ultima Online, and other than MUDs, every other graphical online game was on a service like AOL or Sierra.
Yeah.
So our goal was to go directly through the internet and create a game where people could live in the world of Ultima, live and play together in the world of Ultima. That live part was also a very strong goal for us, where it wasn't just going to be about adventuring, that there was going to be this strong component of dwell.
Yeah.
And we took our inspirations from very pioneering games like Habitat, all the way from the late 80s and MUDs and things like that, where players had their own homes. And so we were the first graphical online game to have homes that you could customize and place anywhere. And I think that balance between adventuring and socializing and having a permanent space that you could call your own is what provided and continues to provide the longevity to it. I think that if we had just had a game that was focused on adventuring, that I don't think it would still be around.
It still is. It really. I mean, I'd love to know. Would you call Ultima Online your most proudest moment in gaming for you? Because its legacy lives on today. It's huge. Or is there other sort of times that you class as your biggest achievement in gaming?
No, there's no doubt that because Ultima Online is definitely my proudest achievement.
Yeah.
Because not only is it still around, and most people can't say that a game they wrote over 20 years ago is still running. Yeah. We launched in '97, and it's 22 years later. It's still going. But it really helped define and shape and create a whole genre of games.
Yeah.
And again, that's not something that you get to say very often, right? That's, so yeah, without a doubt, it is my proudest moment. And the team I had working with me was just incredible. Ralph Coster in particular, he brought to us just this amazing wealth of knowledge from MUDs that without him, we could not have made that game happen. So, we just really, and again, Electronic Arts gets a super bad rap, but the infrastructure that we needed to launch and support that thing would not have been possible without Electronic Arts.
Credit is due, definitely. As I said, it's still popular today. People are still playing it. 22 years, that's incredible. You're right, there isn't many games that can claim that they can still play it. Do you still play yourself? Have you sort of played the game recently yourself, or?
So there was when around the 20th anniversary, there was a whole series of both real world and virtual events.
Yeah.
Where my old character Blackthorn and Richard's character Lord British, where we got in the game and played with players, and there was all sorts of crazy happenings because it was the 20th anniversary, and then we went to a 20th anniversary player event in DC, Washington DC area, which is where the current developers who run the game supported out of, and met with players. And the most amazing thing was meeting a player who introduced me to their son, who was, I think, 17 or 19.
Yeah.
And so was born after the game launched and now plays with his parents. Plays the game with his parents. It was like, oh my God, wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, that is incredible. I mean, I spoke. He's Joe Garriott. I don't know if you know him. He's I think he's Origin Systems' biggest fan. He's got loads.
Yeah. He's got the museum.
He's got the museum, and he showed me some pictures on Facebook Live. And he's been really nice. Actually, he's given me some interesting stories about Origin. But yeah, he says he still goes to Ultima meetups like once a year or even more, and you meet up and they have. I think he said drinks and revelry and so forth. I mean, it's incredibly popular today still.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to almost, I mean, Starr, I suppose you have to almost pinch yourself sometimes when you realise a game you made so many years ago is still so popular, but credit to you, definitely.
Yeah, it was so Raph and Rich Vogel and Richard and I did the 20th anniversary postmortem at the Game Developers Conference.
Right, yeah.
The room was full, but before the thing started, there was like the line to get in, and we were walking up and down the line just saying hi to people. And the most humbling experience for me was talking to younger developers and having them say, that was one of their inspirations for getting in the game industry, and that made me feel really proud. The fact that I could inspire another generation of game developers. Because at the end of the day, I want to entertain people, and I want to have a place where people can go and enjoy themselves, and to know that I'm helping inspire another generation of people who want to do the same thing just makes it all worth it.
Oh, well, credit to you, sir. I'd love to know why did you end up? You said earlier a bit burnt out, but you stayed, and thank goodness you stayed, because you made one of the most important games ever. But what was the reason that made you leave Origin Systems?
So we, after we finished Ultima Online, I worked on the live product for another 6 months.
Yeah.
And then at that point, Electronic Arts, which didn't have a lot of online experience, or none of us had a lot of online experience, but we had now had more under our belt. They were like, well, now you need to work on the sequel. Mm. And we're like, well, we're not sure that it works that way. Like, we think we should just keep expanding this one and then work on a different kind of online game. Mm. Like, we should make a Wing Commander online, or a Privateer online, or we pitched and so we came up with 20 different pitches for online games, including some really wacky ones, we pitched a martial arts, a kung fu. Oh, nice. We pitched a Flash Gordon-y kind of 50s themed sci-fi one. We pitched a football one where it was going to use the Unreal Engine for the football matches. Yeah. And football in what we call soccer, but football for you.
Yeah.
And we'd use Unreal for the matches, so some players who wanted to play as the actual football players could do that part, but then other players could be the managers.
Oh, nice.
So there'd be a whole economic side of it, and then other players could just be in the stands watching the games.
Wow, yeah.
And so it was like an MMO about being a football fan or being a football player, and still I don't understand why no one's done that one. And because they have football manager games, and they have FIFA.
Combine the two.
No one's mashed those up together.
Yeah, good point.
But they said, no, we don't want any of that. We want you to make Ultima Online too. And so I was a good soldier, and so I said, okay, fine, I'll work on Ultima Online 2. But the problem with Ultima Online 2 was that we were chasing the feature set of Ultima Online. So we were trying to do everything Ultima Online had in it, but in 3D.
Yeah.
But more. And so we couldn't ever catch up. And then they ultimately ended up canceling it in favor of some other games that other studios were working on, like Earth and Beyond and Motor City Online and Sims Online. And which ironically were, exactly what we had told them, is like, work on other types of games.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I realized that, I was done and I moved on.
Well, fair play. I mean, it does sound like, you left at the right time, it sounds. You left your legacy and... Yeah. Is it true you joined Disney? I mean, Origin Systems is huge, but Disney, I mean, one of the biggest companies in the world. Is that right?
I did. I worked at Disney for about 5.5 years, and I worked in the Interactive Worlds group, and I built a learning platform that allowed game designers to connect learning content to games, and we connected that platform to Club Penguin.
Oh yeah.
So Club Penguin at that time was the biggest online game for kids, and so we connected that platform to a bunch of games inside Club Penguin, and then built an app in Facebook where parents could see what their kids were learning.
Yeah.
And I was also running the Interactive Worlds group for a little while, and also built some mobile apps for the iPhone that were connected to that learning platform as well.
Nice stuff. So, yeah. Well, yeah. No, I mean, it must have been incredible working at the company. I mean, do you look back with fond memories as well, working at Disney?
Yeah, it was my first office when I got there was actually over in Imagineering, and right outside my office was a full-sized Wall-E robot.
Yeah,
that could be remote controlled. It was pretty amazing work.
That does sound pretty good. We've mentioned Richard Garrett before, aka Lord British. What a real legend he is. I mean, he's done much more than just gaming, isn't he? I think he's literally gone out of Earth, isn't he? He's an astronaut, if that's right. How did you get the opportunity, to rework with him again? You joined him at Portalarium quite recently. How did that happen then?
So I worked at Disney for about 5.5 years, and then I decided that I was ready to look for something new.
Yeah.
And I was at South by, and when I was working for Disney, I had actually moved away from Texas, and I was living in California. But I came to South by Southwest back here in Austin, Texas, which is where Portalarium is. And I reached out to Richard and said, hey, I'm going to be leaving Disney, and just talking to everybody I know about what's going on. He's like, oh, well, we are about to do a Kickstarter for basically the modern rework of Ultima Online.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, tell me more. And so, he basically pitched it and said, hey, this is really what we're trying to do. We're trying to basically recapture the whole, essence of Ultima Online, but with modern technology.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that sounds really cool, and I'm looking for my next thing. And if you have a successful Kickstarter, I'm in.
Nice. And
and then they did. So they asked for $1 million. They got $2 million in their Kickstarter, and so I said, well, I think that counts as a successful Kickstarter. So I'm on board.
Brilliant. I mean, was Shroud of Avatar, was that the first game you properly worked on then? Is that the Is that the Ultima Online sort of spin-off? Is that right?
Yeah. So Shroud the Avatar is the game that they did the Kickstarter for, and it's basically the modern equivalent of Ultima Online. It's a massively multiplayer game with the same sort of sandbox balance of like living and adventuring with an incredibly in-depth customizable housing system and crafting, and to the point where all of the best gear in the world is made by players. So
nice.
You don't actually get components and materials through adventuring that you then use to make the best gear. So it's a completely player-driven economy.
Oh, nice. I'm going to have to check it out, definitely. I haven't played it, but I will give it a go, 100%.
It's free to play. So
yeah?
And everybody who, as soon as you finish the first quest series in second map you go to, you get a free lot deed and a house.
Brilliant. There you go. Oh, nice one, Starr. I mean, was it great working back at Richard then, like the old days? Was it almost the same sort of feeling, the sort of excitement, and getting back to sort of the old days again?
Absolutely. I mean, it was again. Our whole goal was to rework that old magic, and our offices even had all the posters of all the games, all the Origin games, so all the Ultimas and Wing Commanders up on the walls, and like the Ultima Online cover art and all that stuff. So yeah, definitely it was that, just like the old days. For sure.
I love that, because obviously, like I mentioned earlier, Origin Systems is not here sadly anymore, but it does sound, the essence is still there with you and Richard, obviously, so good on you, definitely.
Yeah.
Is there any other new games or projects you're working on you can reveal, or is it all top secret stuff?
Shroud the Avatar has been my focus. We live stream almost on a daily basis, and we have a main official one every Friday at 4:00 Central Time, US. And again, like I mentioned, it's free to play, and so no cost to play, and everybody gets a piece of house. And so that's the main one to check out. I'm doing some consulting stuff, but that's really not gaming related. So I don't compete with myself, basically.
Fair enough.
So I do tech consulting stuff on the side, but that's not really with the game stuff.
Starr, I know you're a busy man, so I'll leave you to it. But again, thank you so much for your time today. I do really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch regarding this week's episode or anything else, you can tweet us at Arcade Attack UK, at Keith Barlow 82, and at arcade_Adriano. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/Arcade Attack UK. Please check out our website at arcadeattack.co.uk for lots of retro gaming goodness, interviews, reviews, features, top 10s, etc. And you can also find all our previous podcasts there. Our podcasts are available to stream from the website and are available to download for free from Stitcher, Podbean and iTunes, where you can also leave us a review and a rating, which we would really, really appreciate. So, until next time, take care and we'll speak to you soon.